Get on your knees and beg until you sign the house over to her." My dad's voice was a furious roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the home we were standing in. He stood there, his chest heaving under his expensive tailored shirt, his face an ugly shade of dark purple, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at the shattered glass he had just hurled violently at my feet. Around us, 50 of our closest relatives and family friends fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The clinking of silverware stopped. The soft background music seemed to fade away. Then a few of my aunts and uncles actually laughed. They snickered, finding my public humiliation deeply entertaining. My own father was demanding I kneel on broken shards of glass, right there in the middle of our grand family reunion, all to surrender the only real piece of security I had ever built. My face burned with a heat so intense I thought my skin might literally melt off my bones. My mother, the woman who was supposed to protect me, just turned her head away, pretending to be utterly fascinated by the floral centerpiece on the dining table. My sister, the golden child who had caused this entire nightmare, stood safely behind him with a smug, triumphant smirk painted on her perfectly contoured face. They all waited for me to break. They expected the tears, the desperate begging, the quiet, broken submission they had conditioned me to provide for 34 years. They thought I was just Marlo, the invisible daughter, the boring corporate drone who would eventually cave under the crushing weight of family drama. They had no idea what I was truly capable of. They had no idea what was sitting inside my lawyer's leather briefcase at that exact moment. They did not know that the ground they were standing on, the very hardwood floorboards my father was demanding I kneel upon, did not actually belong to him. But we will get to that part soon enough. To truly understand how a father could look his eldest daughter in the eye and try to break her spirit in front of a live audience, you have to understand the mountain of lies this family was built upon. You have to understand what happened just a few hours before that terrible party. It was Friday, right around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The Boston financial district was buzzing outside my towering glass office, but inside, the air was cool, sterile, and quiet. I was sitting at the head of a long mahogany conference table, holding a brass key in my palm, my thumb rubbing rhythmically over its smooth, worn edges. I am a mergers and acquisitions specialist. I spend my days tearing apart failing companies, finding their hidden debts and either saving them or stripping them for parts. I had just closed a $20 million deal. The men sitting across from me had been sweating through their expensive suits for 3 hours, terrified of my next move. I was good at my job. I was ruthless when I needed to be, because the numbers never lie. People lie all the time, but the math always tells the brutal truth. My phone lit up on the table. The caller ID flashed the word mom. My stomach instantly tied itself into a familiar, painful knot. I let it ring. I did not want to answer. I knew exactly what she wanted. The grand family reunion was tonight, a massive party my parents threw every year to show off their supposedly perfect life to the rest of the world. She was calling to remind me to behave, to smile, to blend into the wallpaper so my sister Sutton could shine. Before the phone even stopped ringing, an email notification popped up on my laptop screen. It was marked urgent. The sender was Montgomery, my private attorney. Montgomery is a man of very few words. He does not use urgent flags unless the sky is actively falling. I opened the message. The text was short, cold, and horrifying. It read, "Marlo, we have a massive problem. A hard money lender just sent a verification of asset request to Apex Holdings. Your father is using the Lexington address to secure a hot loan of $150,000. He is forging ownership documents. Call me immediately." I stared at the glowing screen, my vision blurring for a fraction of a second. A hard money lender. That meant loan sharks. That meant desperate, dangerous money. My father, Harrison, the proud patriarch who strutted around like he owned the entire state of Massachusetts, was secretly trying to borrow a massive amount of cash against a house he did not own. He was committing federal mortgage fraud, and he was using my property to do it. I closed my laptop with a soft click. I did not call the police. I did not scream. The executives across the table watched me, waiting for me to speak, but my mind was already 45 miles away in the wealthy suburbs of Lexington. I slipped the brass key back into my pocket. It was the only key to the front door of that Lexington house. I had carried it for 6 years. I stood up, smoothed the front of my blazer, and told the room we were done for the day. I walked out to my car, the cold Boston wind hitting my face. I had protected my father's fragile ego for 6 long years. I had bought his house to save him from ruin, hiding my identity behind a corporate LLC just so he could keep his pride. And now he was using my silent grace to commit a felony. I started the engine. I was going to that family reunion. I was going to look him in the eye and see exactly how far his arrogance would take him before I burned his fake kingdom to the ground. The drive from downtown Boston to Lexington usually takes about 45 minutes, but with the heavy Friday evening traffic, it felt like an eternity. The sky was turning a bruised shade of purple, heavy rain clouds gathering on the horizon. My windshield wipers hummed a steady, monotonous rhythm, giving me entirely too much time to think. I hate thinking about my past. My memory is a dark, crowded place. I call it my personal museum of pain. And as I drove closer to the town where I grew up, the exhibits started playing in my mind, vivid and bitter. In my family, there was a very clear hierarchy. There was Sutton, the radiant, flawless golden child, and then there was me, the workhorse, the shadow. Sutton was 6 years younger than me, but she took up all the oxygen in every room she entered. If she scraped her knee, the whole world stopped spinning. If I won a state championship in debate, my father would simply nod, tell me not to get a big head, and complain that the event made him miss his golf game. But the most painful exhibit in my museum was the money. I remember being 18, working 14 hours a day between a diner and a retail store, saving every single dollar just to afford my first year of college tuition. My father told me that building character meant paying my own way. He said the family business was tight on cash, and I needed to be an independent adult. I believed him. I wore second-hand clothes and ate instant noodles until my hair started falling out from stress. 2 years later, Sutton barely graduated high school. She scraped by with terrible grades, showing zero ambition other than taking photos for her social media. And what did my father do? He bought her a brand new, $60,000 Audi as a graduation gift. I remember standing in the driveway, holding my cheap, cracked cell phone, watching my mother tie a massive red bow to the roof of that luxury car. When I asked my father how we could afford that when I was drowning in student loans, he looked at me like I was a beggar off the street. He said, "Your sister needs a safe, reliable vehicle for her future. You are already used to struggling, Marlo. You can handle it." I swallowed that pain. I swallowed it and buried it deep in my chest. But there was one person in the family who saw through the toxic fog. My grandmother. She was a tough, quiet woman who lived in a small room at the back of the house. Everyone treated her like a burden, rolling their eyes when she told her old stories, but I would sit with her for hours. When she passed away, the whole family scoffed because she left behind no fancy jewelry, no grand estate. They laughed about how poor she was right after the funeral. They were so incredibly wrong. 2 weeks after she died, a young attorney named Montgomery called me into his office. He handed me a folder and told me my grandmother had set up a secret, anonymous trust fund just for me. She knew how my parents favored Sutton. She knew I would be left with nothing. The trust contained exactly $500,000. It was seed money. It was freedom. It was the only reason I was able to survive, invest, and eventually build my career in real estate and corporate acquisitions. 6 years ago, my father's precious construction supply business took a massive hit. He was bleeding cash, taking out terrible loans to fund my mother's lavish lifestyle and Sutton's endless shopping sprees. The bank sent a notice of foreclosure. The great Harrison family was 11 days away from being thrown out onto the street. My mother called me in the middle of the night, weeping, begging for help. So I helped. I took my grandmother's money, the money they mocked, and I created Apex Holdings LLC. Through the company, I paid off the entire mortgage balance, the late fees, the penalties. Over $400,000 in cash, wiped out in a single wire transfer. The bank signed the deed over to Apex. My parents signed the pre-foreclosure paperwork without even reading the fine print. They were so desperate, so terrified of losing their social status, they did not care who the anonymous investor was. I told them I found a private buyer who would let them stay indefinitely rent-free. I never told them it was me. I wanted to save my father's dignity. I knew that if he had to look at me every morning and know his unloved, ignored daughter was his landlord, the shame would turn him vicious. My silence was a gift of pure love. But as I turned my car onto the familiar, tree-lined streets of my childhood neighborhood, I realized that silence had been a terrible mistake. You cannot save people who are determined to drown you. I pulled into the sprawling driveway. The house looked like a magazine cover. The massive front lawn was perfectly manicured. The warm yellow lights glowed from the tall windows, spilling out onto the expensive cars parked everywhere. And right by the front door, embedded in the brickwork, was the heavy blue stone my father loved so much. It read, Harrison Family, established 1980. He had it polished every single spring. I put my car in park, took a deep breath, and prepared to step into the lion's den. I promised myself one thing before I opened the car door. I would not let them see me bleed tonight. The rain had just started to mist as I stepped out of my car. Almost instantly, a sleek, obnoxious sports car aggressively whipped into the driveway, its high beams blinding me. It swerved dangerously close to my legs before slamming on the brakes, blocking my car completely into the corner of the driveway. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped Declan. Declan was Sutton's fiancé. He was a 30-year-old man who looked like he spent more time curating his Instagram aesthetic than actually working. He wore a velvet dinner jacket and loafers without socks, despite the freezing October weather. He saw me standing there in the rain and flashed a bright, predatory smile. "Marlo. Wow, you actually showed up," he called out, loudly enough for the guests on the front porch to hear. He leaned against his car, looking me up and down with obvious distaste. "You know, if you told us you were coming, I would have left a spot in the back for your little sedan. I hope you don't mind being boxed in. The VIPs need the good spots near the door." I looked at him, then at my car. "Declan, I need to be able to leave later. Move your car." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Always in a rush to get back to your depressing little cubicle, aren't you? By the way, is that what you are wearing to a formal family event? A dark suit? You look like a low-level secretary showing up to a funeral. It makes you look cheap, Marlo." I looked down at my outfit. It was a custom-tailored, $5,000 suit imported from Italy. The fabric alone cost more than his ridiculous velvet jacket. But a man who measures his wealth in flashy logos would never understand quiet luxury. I did not bother defending myself. I just offered a tight, polite smile. "It is good to see you too, Declan. Where's my sister?" "Inside, holding court," he said proudly. "Everyone is dying to see the ring." I walked past him, ignoring his smug laughter, and pushed open the heavy oak front door. The house smelled like expensive catering and heavy perfume. There were at least 50 people crammed into the grand foyer and the sprawling living room. Relatives I had not seen in years, business associates of my father, and Sutton's loud, obnoxious friends. I spotted Sutton immediately. She was standing by the grand staircase, wearing a shimmering designer gown that looked more appropriate for the red carpet than a family dinner. She was holding her left hand up high, letting the chandelier light catch the massive, sparkling stone on her finger. A crowd of aunts and cousins were gasping and cooing over it. "It is custom," Sutton was practically squealing. "Declan had it imported. We are planning the wedding in Lake Como, Italy, next spring. It is going to be incredibly exclusive." I walked quietly toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I passed by the staircase, Sutton caught my eye. Her smile faltered for a second, replacing it with a look of pure condescension. "Marlo, you made it. Listen, try not to bring the mood down tonight, okay? Declan's parents are here, and they are major investors. Just try to smile and act normal." "Congratulations on the engagement, Sutton," I said evenly. I looked at the ring. The stone was huge, but the way the light refracted through it was entirely wrong. It lacked the sharp, icy fire of a real diamond. It was a cubic zirconia. A very large, very fake piece of glass. It figured. A fake ring for a fake life. I pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen, desperate for a moment of quiet. The kitchen was mostly empty, save for the catering staff bustling around the ovens. But tucked away in the far corner, near the pantry door, I saw my mother, Lenora. She was frantic. Her back was to me, and her shoulders were hunched tight. She was holding a crumpled piece of thick, official-looking paper. I stepped closer, my footsteps masked by the noise of the party outside. She was whispering fiercely into her cell phone. "I told you, you have to give us more time," she hissed into the receiver. "Harrison is finalizing the paperwork tonight. The collateral will be secured by Monday. You cannot call the loan in now. If you ruin Sutton's wedding, I swear to God." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. Her face went pale, and her hand shook violently as she shoved the crumpled paper deep into the bottom of the trash can, covering it with coffee grounds. "Just wait until Monday," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "We're getting the 150,000. Just wait." She hung up, leaning heavily against the counter, gasping for air. I stepped backward, melting into the shadows of the hallway before she could turn around and see me. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Montgomery's email was right. It wasn't just a random inquiry. They were in desperate, immediate trouble. They owed dangerous people a massive amount of money, and my mother was entirely complicit in the scheme to steal my house to pay for it. The betrayal stung deeper than I expected. She knew what he was doing. She was helping him forge the documents. Suddenly, a loud, sharp ringing echoed through the house. The grand-grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9. From the living room, my father's booming voice rose above the chatter. "Family, friends, if I could have your attention in the main dining room, please. It is time for a very special announcement." The party noise shifted as the crowd began filtering toward the dining room. I stood in the dark hallway, my hands balled into tight fists. The Museum of Pain was closed. It was time to enter the battlefield. The dining room was a sea of glittering crystal and polished silver. 50 guests crowded around the edges of the room, holding their champagne flutes, their faces flushed with expensive wine and the thrill of wealthy gossip. At the head of the massive mahogany table stood my father, Harrison. He looked like a king addressing his loyal subjects. His navy suit was perfectly pressed, his silver hair swept back, his posture radiating absolute authority. Sutton stood to his right, clinging to Declan's arm, looking like a princess awaiting her crown. My mother hurried out from the kitchen, her face composed into a flawless, serene mask, completely hiding the desperate panic I had just witnessed moments ago. She took her place at my father's left side. I stood at the very back of the room, leaning against the cold plaster wall, holding a glass of sparkling water I had no intention of drinking. I watched them with the cold, detached analytical eye I used during corporate hostile takeovers. "Thank you all for being here tonight," my father began, his voice dropping into that deep, gravelly tone he used when he wanted to sound historically important. "This family reunion is about more than just catching up. It is about legacy. My father laid the foundation for the Harrison name right here in this town. We have faced hardships, sure. Every great family does. But we always survive because we hold on to what matters." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Several ants murmured in agreement. "This house," he continued, gesturing widely to the vaulted ceilings and the rich wood paneling. "This house is the ultimate symbol of our resilience. It is the heart of the Harrison family. And a house like this, a legacy like this, needs to be protected by those who truly understand its value. By those who will carry the family name into the future with grace and style." He turned his gaze to Sutton, his eyes softening with a sickening amount of pride. "Sutton, my beautiful youngest daughter, you are about to embark on a new journey with Declan. You are going to build a family of your own. And your mother and I have decided that there is no better wedding gift we could possibly give you than the very foundation of our legacy." He raised his glass high. "Tonight, in front of all our loved ones, I am proud to announce that I am officially signing this house, the Harrison family estate, over to Sutton and Declan. It is yours, my darling. To keep, to grow, and to cherish. The room erupted into deafening applause. Aunts were wiping away dramatic tears. Uncles were clapping Declan on the back. Sutton covered her mouth in shock, crying perfectly photogenic tears as she threw her arms around my father's neck. Oh, Daddy. Thank you. Thank you so much. I stood perfectly still. My blood ran ice cold. He was giving it away. He was standing in a house he lost 6 years ago, a house I had bought with my own secret money, and he was gifting it to the sister who had never worked a hard day in her miserable life. But the performance was not over. My father gently pulled away from Sutton and reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick, folded legal document. He smoothed it out on the dining table, taking a silver fountain pen from his pocket. Then, his eyes scanned the room, slicing through the crowd until they locked directly onto me. The warmth in his face vanished, replaced by a hard, calculating stare. Of course, he said, his voice carrying over the dying applause, to make sure the transition is entirely smooth, and to avoid any tedious legal delays with the county clerk, we need to handle a small piece of family business. Marlowe, step forward. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, leaving me exposed at the back of the room. 50 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. Some looked curious, some looked pitying. Declan smirked. I pushed off the wall and walked slowly toward the head of the table. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, a steady, measured rhythm. I stopped right across the table from him. What is this, Dad? I asked, my voice calm, flat, betraying zero emotion. He tapped the paper with his pen. This is a standard quitclaim deed. It simply states that you, as my eldest daughter, waive any future rights, claims, or inheritance disputes regarding this property. It is just a formality, Marlowe. To ensure your sister has a clean title. I need your signature. I looked down at the paper. It was a poorly drafted, internet template quitclaim document. He was trying to cover his tracks for the hard money lender. If I signed this, he could present it to the loan sharks as proof that his children had no claim, making it easier to forge the primary title transfer. It was a desperate, sloppy, criminal move. I looked up from the paper, directly into my father's eyes. I saw the arrogant certainty in his expression. He fully believed I would just take the pen, sign away my ghost of an inheritance, and fade back into the shadows so as not to cause a scene. He relied on my fear of public embarrassment. No, I said quietly. The word dropped into the room like a lead weight. My father blinked, his smile freezing. Excuse me. I did not raise my voice. I spoke clearly, ensuring the people closest to the table could hear every single syllable. I said no, Dad. I am not signing that paper. I looked at Sutton, who was suddenly glaring at me with raw venom. Besides, you cannot give away what you do not own. And, honestly, Sutton, how exactly are you planning to pay the annual property taxes on a 6,000 square foot estate when you are currently drowning in credit card debt? A collective, sharp gasp echoed through the dining room. Someone dropped a fork, and it clattered loudly against a porcelain plate. The illusion of the perfect family shattered into a million irreversible pieces. The silence that followed my words was not just quiet, it was a heavy, suffocating vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. 50 guests stood paralyzed, their champagne flutes suspended halfway to their mouths. My mother let out a small, terrified squeak and gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Declan's smug grin vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, confused panic as he glanced rapidly between me and Sutton. But it was my father who truly broke. I watched the transformation happen in real time. The dignified patriarch mask melted off his face, revealing the vicious, cornered animal underneath. The red flush on his neck violently crawled up to his cheeks, his forehead, his ears. The veins at his temples bulged against his skin, pulsing rapidly. He had built his entire identity around being the untouchable king of this family, and the daughter he viewed as an ugly, annoying peasant had just publicly slapped him across the face with reality. "How dare you," he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage so deep it vibrated the crystal glasses on the table. "How dare you speak to your sister that way in my house? It is a simple mathematical question. Dad, I replied, my tone maintaining that terrifying corporate calm. I did not blink. I did not step back. She does not have an income. A house like this requires maintenance. I am just looking out for her financial well-being. Shut your mouth, Sutton screeched, dropping her fake princess persona entirely. Her face twisted into an ugly snarl. You are just a jealous, bitter, lonely hag. You cannot stand that I am getting married and getting the house while you have nothing. Sutton, calm down, Declan whispered frantically, trying to pull her arm back, clearly embarrassed by her sudden screeching. But my father was completely beyond reason. His pride had been punctured in front of the exact people he was trying to impress. He needed to reassert his dominance. He needed to crush me into the dirt so thoroughly that nobody would ever doubt his power again. He reached out, his large hand wrapping around a heavy crystal wine glass filled with dark red Merlot. With a sudden, violent jerk of his arm, he hurled the glass directly at the floor, inches from my shoes. The crystal exploded with a deafening crash. Sharp shards of glass exploded outward, raining over my leather pumps. The dark red wine splattered across the polished hardwood floor, looking horrifyingly like fresh blood. Several women in the crowd screamed and jumped back. My mother covered her face with both hands, turning completely away from the scene, refusing to look at me, refusing to intervene. She was choosing him. She was choosing the lie. You disrespectful, ungrateful little wretch, my father roared, stepping around the table until he was towering right over me. Spit flew from his lips, landing on my cheek. You're sick with jealousy. You have always been jealous of her happiness. I gave you a roof over your head. I gave you my name. And this is how you repay me? By trying to ruin her engagement party. He pointed a shaking, furious finger down at the puddle of wine and the jagged pieces of broken crystal. You want to act like an arrogant brat? Then I will treat you like one, he bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Get on your knees. Right now. You get on your knees on this floor, and you beg your sister for forgiveness for ruining her night. And you will stay down there until you pick up that pen and sign this goddamn document. The room went entirely numb. A grown woman. A 34-year-old professional who managed multi-million-dollar accounts. My father was ordering me to kneel on broken glass in the middle of a dinner party, like a disobedient dog being rubbed in its own mess. And then, the most sickening thing happened. From the back of the room, one of my uncles let out a low, mocking chuckle. Then a cousin joined in. It started as a nervous ripple, but within seconds, several members of the family were actually laughing. They were laughing at my humiliation. They found my public execution entertaining. Declan snickered, pulling his phone out of his pocket, holding it up slightly to record the moment. Sutton crossed her arms, her chest puffed out, waiting for me to submit. They wanted blood. They needed a sacrifice to make themselves feel superior. The heat in my face reached a boiling point. My ears were ringing. The instinct I had been brainwashed with my entire life screamed at me to surrender. Just do it, Marlowe. Just apologize. Keep the peace. Don't make a scene. I looked down at the sharp, glittering shards of glass near my toes. I looked at the dark red wine seeping into the wood grain. I looked at my mother's back, still turned cowardly away from me. And then I looked up into my father's eyes. I saw the desperate hunger for control. I saw a small, pathetic man who was drowning in secret debt, trying to terrorize his daughter into saving his fragile, fake empire. The fear evaporated. The shame vanished. The lifelong desire to be loved by these monsters burned away into white-hot ash. A profound, chilling calmness washed over my entire body. It was the feeling a predator gets when it finally corners its prey. I did not cry. I did not shake. I did not kneel. I stood perfectly straight, squaring my shoulders. I looked at him, feeling the solid weight of the brass key sitting in the pocket of my blazer. The key that proved I owned the floor he was ordering me to kneel on. The key that proved I owned the roof over his head. Are you deaf? My father screamed, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles popped. I said get on your knees. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the chaotic noise of the room wash over me one last time. I let the laughter, the insults, and the betrayal settle deep into my bones, ensuring I would never, ever forget this exact feeling. I looked at my father's purple, raging face. I looked at Sutton's cruel, anticipating smirk. I looked at the crowd of relatives who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable accessory to their grand family narrative. I opened my mouth, my voice carrying no anger, no sadness, no fear. It was just an absolute, terrifying void. All right. Just that one word. All right. My father's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. A sickening smile of victory began to pull at the corners of his mouth. He thought the word all right meant I had surrendered. He thought I was verbally agreeing to his insane demand. He took a half step back, giving me room to drop down onto the broken glass. He gestured toward the floor with a grand, sweeping motion of his hand, waiting for the show. I did not drop. Instead, I turned sharply on my heel, my leather shoe crunching over a piece of broken crystal. I walked calmly and deliberately past him. I walked past the dining table, past my mother's trembling back, past Declan's phone camera, and walked straight out into the grand hallway. "Where the hell do you think you are going?" my father bellowed from the dining room, his voice cracking with renewed fury. "I am not finished with you. Get back here." I ignored him. I placed my hand on the polished mahogany banister and walked up the grand staircase. The heavy thud of my father's footsteps followed me to the base of the stairs, but he did not follow me up. He stood at the bottom, shouting up into the dark. "You walk out that door, Marlowe, and you are dead to this family. Do you hear me? You are completely cut off. Don't you ever come crawling back here asking for help." I reached the second-floor landing and turned right, heading toward my old childhood bedroom. Cut off? The irony was so rich I could almost taste it. I pushed open the door to the room I had slept in for 18 years. It was exactly as I had left it on my last visit. The bed was neatly made, a few books on the desk, some clothes hanging in the small closet. I pulled a small duffel bag from under the bed. I moved with mechanical, brutal efficiency. It took me exactly 10 minutes to pack every single item I owned in that house. I folded my clothes perfectly. I took my books. I stripped the bedsheets and folded the blanket into a neat, tight square at the foot of the bare mattress. I did not throw things. I did not act out of chaotic anger. I wanted the room to look deliberate. I wanted it to look like a surgical extraction. When I was finished, the room was a barren, empty shell. I set my bag down by the door and pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I opened my messages and selected Montgomery's name. My thumbs flew across the keyboard, typing the final nail into the Harrison family coffin. He just tried to force me to kneel on broken glass to sign away the house. The grace period is officially over. Trigger the eviction. Trigger the federal fraud files. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Meet me here. We are blowing it all up. I hit send. Montgomery replied less than 10 seconds later. Confirmed. Sleep well. Tomorrow we go to war. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. There was one last thing to do. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my keychain. I separated the bright brass key, the true owner's key that I had carried in secret for 6 years. I kept that one safely in my palm. Then, I unclipped the generic silver spare key, the guest key my parents had given me to use when I visited. I walked over to the wooden nightstand beside the stripped bed. I placed the silver guest key gently on the center of the wood. I did not belong here anymore as a guest, and I certainly did not belong here as a daughter. I slung my duffel bag over my shoulder, walked out of the room, and closed the door with a quiet, final click. I took the back stairs down to the kitchen to avoid the crowd still buzzing in the dining room. The caterers watched me pass like I was a ghost. I stepped out through the heavy side door into the freezing, rainy October night. The cold air hit my burning face, and I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the sharp scent of wet leaves and asphalt. I walked to my car. Declan's sports car was still blocking me in. I did not ask him to move it. I threw my bag into the passenger seat, climbed behind the wheel, and started the engine. I put the sedan in reverse, cranked the wheel hard, and backed up. My heavy steel bumper slammed violently into the side panel of Declan's expensive, leased sports car with a horrific crunch of fiberglass and metal. The sports car's alarm instantly began blaring into the night. I shifted into drive, maneuvering around the fresh dent I had just created, and drove smoothly down the long driveway. As I passed the blue stone marking the Harrison family legacy, I did not look back. I drove onto the dark highway, heading back to Boston. For the first time in 34 years, my chest felt incredibly light. The storm had broken. The night belonged to my father's arrogance. But the morning? The morning belonged to me. Thank you for following along halfway through this dramatic story. If you're feeling the same excitement as I do, please comment, "I'm win" below. That's the secret signal for those who have been with me until this moment. I will like and reply to every comment containing the keyword "I'm win." Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss part 2, when dawn breaks and the most terrifying legal upset befalls this toxic family. The drive back to Lexington on Saturday morning was entirely different from the night before. The heavy rain clouds had cleared out, leaving the sky a brilliant, blinding shade of cold autumn blue. The sun was shining brightly, casting long, sharp shadows across the highway. I had slept for exactly 4 hours in my downtown apartment, but I did not feel tired. I felt electric. The adrenaline of what was about to happen was humming through my veins like a live wire. I pulled into the affluent neighborhood right at 7:45 in the morning. I parked my car half a block down from the Harrison estate, waiting. Exactly 5 minutes later, a sleek black town car glided silently to the curb right behind me. The back door opened and Montgomery stepped out. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, holding a thick, heavy leather briefcase. He was flanked by 2 of his junior associates, both carrying identical black folders. They looked like an execution squad dressed for Wall Street. I stepped out of my car and walked to meet them. Montgomery gave me a single, crisp nod. No small talk. He knew the stakes. "The eviction notices are drafted," Montgomery said, his voice low and gravelly. "The fraud documentation has been compiled into a single exhibit file. If he refuses to cooperate, the courier is standing by to deliver the copies directly to the district attorney and the FBI field office." "Good," I replied, smoothing the lapels of my blazer. "Let's go." We walked up the long, curving driveway together. The crushed gravel crunched loudly under our shoes. Declan's sports car was gone. He must have had it towed in the middle of the night after I smashed into it. The massive house looked peaceful from the outside, hiding the absolute rot festering within its walls. Inside the house, as I would later piece together from the security cameras I had secretly installed in the common areas years ago, my family was enjoying a lavish breakfast. The caterers had left behind trays of pastries and fresh fruit. The smell of expensive coffee filled the air. My father was sitting at the head of the dining table, wearing a plush bathrobe, sipping his coffee with a smug, satisfied expression of a victorious warlord. My mother was buttering a croissant, acting as though the horrific abuse of the previous night had never happened. Sutton was scrolling through her phone, probably checking the social media engagement on the photos of her fake diamond ring. "I still cannot believe she actually left," Sutton sneered, taking a bite of a strawberry. "She is so dramatic." Smashing into Declan's car like a psycho. Declan was furious, by the way. He had to call a premium flatbed. My father let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Let her throw her little temper tantrum. She will be back. She always comes crawling back when she realizes she has nobody else. I checked her room this morning. Stripped bare. She thinks she is making a point. But when she calls crying next week, I am going to make her beg before I even let her through the front door." He took another arrogant sip of his coffee. He truly believed he had won. He truly believed I was nothing more than a terrified child running away into the dark. And then, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite, gentle chime. It was 3 rapid, aggressive rings that echoed loudly through the entire house. My father frowned, setting his mug down. Who the hell is ringing the bell like that at 8 o'clock on a Saturday? He stood up, tightening the belt of his bathrobe, and marched confidently out of the dining room and down the grand hallway. He reached the heavy oak front door and pulled it open, fully prepared to yell at whoever was standing on his porch. His annoyed expression vanished instantly when he saw me standing there, flanked by 3 men in dark suits. "Marlowe," he snapped, his voice dropping into a dangerous growl. "What the hell is this?" Did you bring lawyers to threaten me over Declan's car? You have a lot of nerve showing your face here after the stunt you pulled last night. I did not say a word. I simply stepped to the side, allowing Montgomery to take the front position. Montgomery did not offer his hand to shake. He did not smile. He looked at my father the way one might look at a particularly disgusting insect on the bottom of their shoe. Harrison, Montgomery said, his voice echoing like a judge handing down a sentence. I am the senior legal representative for Apex Holdings, LLC. And you, sir, are illegally residing on my client's property. My father blinked. His brain completely failed to process the sentence. What? Apex what? What the hell are you talking about? This is my house. Get off my porch before I call the police. Montgomery did not move an inch. He simply reached out, firmly grasped the heavy oak door, and pushed it wide open, stepping right past my father into the grand foyer. His two associates followed, and I walked in last, the brass owner's key resting heavy and warm in my pocket. You can call the police if you wish, Harrison, Montgomery said, walking straight toward the dining room. In fact, I highly encourage it. It will save me the trouble of calling the federal authorities myself. My father was turning red again, shouting and chasing after us down the hallway. My mother and Sutton jumped up from the dining table in shock as we marched into the room. Gordon, who are these people? My mother cried out, her hands flying to her mouth. Montgomery stopped at the head of the long dining table. He unlatched his heavy leather briefcase with two sharp clicks. He reached inside and pulled out a thick file folder stamped with the red seal of the county clerk's office. He slammed it down onto the polished mahogany table right where my father had been sitting. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. We are here to correct a massive, criminal delusion, Montgomery stated, his eyes locking onto my father. We are here to stop you from stealing a house you do not own. Fan 8. And Hung Kong so gay soc va toi ac lean bang. This is insane, my father roared, pointing a trembling finger at Montgomery. I own this house. I built this family. You are trespassing. Marlowe, call off your attack dogs right now. I stepped forward, moving out from behind Montgomery's shadow. I looked around the room. I looked at the beautiful vaulted ceilings, the expensive artwork on the walls, and the lavish breakfast spread. Then I looked directly into my father's panicked eyes. You do not own this house, Dad, I said quietly. The absolute certainty in my voice made the room temperature plummet. You have not owned this house for 6 years. My father froze. His jaw went slack. What? Montgomery opened the file folder and pulled out a certified, watermarked document. He laid it flat on the table, tapping the center of the page with his index finger. This is the official property deed, registered and recorded 6 years ago with the county, Montgomery explained, his tone completely devoid of mercy. The owner of record is Apex Holdings, LLC. You, Harrison, lost this property to the bank. It was exactly 11 days away from a public foreclosure auction. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. Sutton looked completely lost, her eyes darting between me and the legal papers. No, my father whispered, shaking his head rapidly. No, the bank restructured my debt. An investor bought the note and allowed us to stay. That was the deal. There was no restructuring, I cut in, my voice slicing through his pathetic denial. The bank was going to throw you out on the street. I am the one who received the panicked phone call in the middle of the night. So, I took my own money. I created Apex Holdings. I wired $400,000 in cash to clear your entire mortgage, all your late fees, and all your penalties. I took a slow step closer to the table, making sure he could see the cold, dead look in my eyes. I bought your house, Dad. I let you stay here rent-free for 6 years because I wanted to protect your fragile, pathetic pride. I am the anonymous investor. I am your landlord. The color rapidly drained from my father's face. He looked like he had just been physically struck by a speeding train. His knees actually buckled slightly, forcing him to grip the back of a dining chair to remain standing. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The great, untouchable patriarch was suddenly reduced to a trembling old man realizing his entire life was a charity case funded by the daughter he despised. You bought it? Sutton stammered, her voice high and shrill. No, That is a lie. Bo told me the house was mine. He announced it last night. He announced a fantasy, Sutton, I replied, not even looking at her. Which brings us to the real reason we are here this morning. I nodded at Montgomery. The lawyer pulled a second document from the folder. It was a copy of the hard money loan application I had intercepted. Yesterday afternoon, Montgomery said, we intercepted a verification request from a predatory lending group. You, Harrison, submitted an application for a high-interest loan of $150,000. On that application, you listed this property as collateral. Furthermore, you submitted a forged statement of ownership to bypass the title search. My mother let out a loud, terrifying sob and buried her face in her hands. Do you understand what you have done? Montgomery asked, leaning over the table, his voice a lethal whisper. Attempting to secure a financial loan using an asset you do not own, across state banking lines, constitutes federal wire fraud and mortgage fraud. The moment you submitted that forged document, you committed a felony. The mandatory minimum sentence for this level of financial fraud is 10 years in a federal penitentiary. 10 years, my father breathed out, his eyes wide with absolute, primal terror. No, I just needed the money for the wedding. I was going to pay it back. I just needed a bridge loan. You did not need it for a wedding, I snapped, dropping my corporate mask for a fraction of a second. My voice cracked like a whip. You needed it to cover for her. I reached into my own bag, pulled out a stack of intercepted credit card statements and collections notices, and threw them violently across the table. They scattered over the croissants and the coffee cups. Look at them, I demanded, pointing at Sutton, who was suddenly looking around for an escape route. Sutton is not a wealthy influencer. She is a fraud. She is currently carrying $300,000 in high-interest debt across 14 different credit cards and personal loans. She has been funding her fake luxury lifestyle with money she does not have. The loan sharks were coming for her, weren't they, Dad? They were going to break her legs, or worse, expose her to the internet. So you decided to steal my house to pay off her massive debts. Sutton burst into frantic, ugly tears. Shut up. Shut up, Marlo. You are ruining everything. I did not ruin anything. I yelled, the years of repressed anger finally bubbling to the surface. You ruined yourself. And you, Dad, you were willing to commit federal fraud to save her, while demanding I kneel on broken glass for the privilege of watching you do it. The dining room was dead silent, save for Sutton's hysterical sobbing and my father's ragged, panicked breathing. The shock numbers were on the table. The legal threats were real. The trap had been completely, flawlessly sprung. The front door, which Montgomery had left slightly ajar, suddenly swung open. Footsteps echoed heavily in the foyer. Declan walked into the dining room, looking furious and disheveled. He was holding a piece of paper in his hand, clearly a towing receipt for his ruined sports car. Sutton, we need to leave, Declan barked, not fully assessing the horrifying tension in the room. I just had to pay a premium fee to get my car towed because your lunatic sister does not know how to drive. Get your purse. We are going back to the city. He stopped, finally noticing the three men in suits, the scattered legal documents, and the fact that my father looked like he was about to have a massive coronary event. What is going on? Declan asked, his annoyance shifting into confusion. I looked at Declan, the man who had mocked my clothing and called me a cheap secretary just 12 hours ago. I picked up one of the credit card statements from the table and held it out to him. Just a little family meeting, Declan, I said smoothly. We were just discussing Sutton's wedding gift. The house is no longer on the table. In fact, nothing is on the table. But I think you should read this before you finalize your catering numbers for Lake Como. Declan hesitated, looking at Sutton. Sutton was shaking her head frantically, her eyes wide with terror. Don't look at it, Declan. Please, she is lying. She is just jealous. Declan snatched the paper from my hand. He read the top line. Then his eyes dropped to the total balance due. $300,000. He flipped the page, reading the aggressive collection threats highlighted in bold red ink. I watched the exact moment Declan's fake, gold-digging heart shattered. He was a parasite looking for a wealthy host to fund his own lifestyle. He had attached himself to the Harrison family believing he was marrying into a massive, untouchable estate. Now he was holding a piece of paper that proved his beautiful bride was actually an incredibly deep financial black hole. "You," Declan whispered, staring at Sutton with absolute disgust. "You are broke? You owe $300,000. I can explain," Sutton pleaded, stepping toward him, reaching out with her hands. "Declan, my brand is growing. I just need one good sponsorship and I can pay it all off. We can still have the wedding." "Are you out of your mind?" Declan screamed, violently slapping her hands away from him. He backed up as if she were carrying a contagious disease. "You lied to me. You told me your father was setting up a trust fund for us. You told me you owned a marketing firm. You are a fraud. Declan, please." Sutton dropped to her knees right there on the dining room floor, her expensive dress pooling around her, begging the exact way they had wanted me to beg the night before. Declan did not even hesitate. He reached down to his left hand, grabbed the fake diamond ring he had given her, and yanked it off his finger. He threw it hard at her chest. "Do not ever contact me again, you crazy, broke lunatic," Declan spat. He turned around, practically running down the hallway, and slammed the front door shut behind him. The golden child's perfect fairy tale had burned to ash in less than 60 seconds. My father stood frozen, unable to comfort his favorite daughter. He slowly turned his head toward my mother, his eyes pleading for some kind of support, some kind of defense. "Lenora," he croaked out. "Lenora, tell them this is a mistake. Tell them we did not know." This was the moment. The final twist of the knife. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. "Do not ask Mom to lie for you, Dad. Because she has known the truth for 3 years. My father's head whipped back toward me. "What?" I held up the phone, hitting play on a video file. I turned the volume all the way up. The audio was crystal clear. It was a recording from the hidden security camera I had installed in the hallway outside my bedroom. The timestamp on the video was from 3 years ago. On the screen, my mother was sneaking out of my bedroom while I was downstairs cooking. She was holding a folder. She stopped in the hallway, pulling out the exact property deed Montgomery had just placed on the table. The camera caught her face perfectly as she read the name Apex Holdings and saw my signature at the bottom of the page. She realized her despised daughter owned the house. But instead of confronting me, the video showed her shoving the paper back into the folder, looking around nervously, and putting it back in my room. I paused the video and looked at my father. "She found my private documents 3 years ago," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "She knew I owned the house. She knew I saved you. But she hated the idea of owing her life to me so much that she never told you. And worse, when Sutton got into trouble with the loan sharks, Mom was the one who suggested you use the house to get the loan. She pushed you to commit federal fraud, hoping you would successfully steal the house back from me before I ever noticed." My father slowly turned to look at his wife of 40 years. His face contorted in a mixture of horror, betrayal, and absolute rage. "You knew?" he whispered, stepping toward her. "You let me stand up in front of 50 people last night and give away a house I did not own? You let me make a fool of myself? You let me commit a felony?" "Gordon, I was trying to protect Sutton," my mother shrieked, backing away from him until her back hit the kitchen door. "If the lenders found out Sutton could not pay, they were going to hurt her. You are a man. You were supposed to fix it. You set me up to go to federal prison," my father roared, grabbing the edge of the dining table and violently flipping it over. Plates, coffee cups, and food crashed to the floor in a chaotic, deafening explosion of ceramic and wood. The family was tearing itself apart. The loyalty, the legacy, the united front, it was all an illusion. The moment the money disappeared, they turned into wild animals, ready to rip each other's throats out to save themselves. Montgomery calmly stepped back to avoid the flying debris from the flipped table. He checked his watch, completely unfazed by the screaming family members. My father stood amidst the wreckage of his dining room, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He had lost his daughter's fiancé. He had lost his wife's loyalty. He had lost the house. But the toxic, narcissistic core of Harrison was still desperately clinging to life. He needed to find one last piece of leverage. He needed to believe he still had power. Fine, my father screamed at me, kicking a broken coffee cup across the floor. Keep the damn house. I don't need it. I don't need your charity, you ungrateful snake. I will pack my bags and I will leave today. I still have my commercial supply company. I still have my business. I will rebuild, and I will make sure my company completely cuts ties with any firm you ever work for. He pointed a shaking finger at me, trying to summon the old, terrifying authority he used to hold over me when I was a child. I am Harrison. I built a company from the ground up. You can take my house, but you cannot take my name, and you cannot take my business. I looked at him. I actually felt a brief, fleeting moment of pity. It is a terrible thing to watch a man realize he is completely and utterly powerless. I reached into my pocket, pulling out one final piece of folded paper. I slowly walked forward, stepping over the spilled coffee and the broken plates, until I was standing right in front of him. I held the paper out. "Read it, Dad," I commanded softly. He snatched the paper from my hand, his eyes scanning the text. It was a commercial real estate lease agreement. "What is this?" he muttered, his eyes darting back and forth. "This is the lease for my company's warehouse lot in the South District." "What does this have to do with anything?" "Look at the name of the holding company that purchased the South District commercial lots 2 years ago," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He traced his finger down the page until he hit the landlord section. The owner of the property was listed as M Capital Investments. M Capital, he read aloud, confusion thick in his voice. "So what?" "My business pays rent to M Capital. They just raised our rent by 30% last year. It has been killing our margins." "M Capital," I repeated slowly, letting the syllables hang in the air. "Marlowe Capital. It is my primary commercial real estate fund. I am the majority shareholder and the sole executive director." The silence returned. But this time, it was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a graveyard. "You pay rent to me, Dad," I said, leaning in so close he could see his own terrified reflection in my eyes. "The ground your company sits on belongs to me. The warehouse you operate out of belongs to me. I raised your rent by 30% last year because I saw your profit margins and realized you were hoarding cash to buy Sutton More designer clothes instead of paying your vendors. I am your landlord at home, and I am your landlord at work. I own the ground you sleep on, and I own the ground you work on." I stepped back, delivering the final, fatal blow. "If you walk out of this house today, Dad, Montgomery will immediately file an emergency eviction notice for your commercial lot. Your business will be locked out of its own warehouse by Monday morning. You will lose your inventory. You will default on your supplier contracts. You will be entirely, legally, and financially ruined by Tuesday." The paper slipped from my father's trembling fingers, fluttering softly to the floor and landing in a puddle of spilled milk. He stared at me. He looked for a bluff. He looked for a crack in my armor. He looked for the little girl who used to cry when he yelled at her. But she was dead. She had died on this exact floor the night before, surrounded by broken glass and mocking laughter. My father's breath hitched in his throat. His shoulders slumped. The absolute, soul-crushing reality of his situation crashed down on him with the weight of a collapsing building. He had nowhere to go. He had no money to fight me. He had no leverage. He was entirely at my mercy. Slowly, agonizingly, his knees gave out. He sank down. Right there in the middle of the ruined dining room. He dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor, his head bowed, his hands resting limply on his thighs. The man who had demanded I kneel before him just 12 hours ago was now kneeling at my feet, broken, defeated, and completely silent. Checkmate. I stood looking down at my father for a long time. Sutton was still sobbing quietly in the corner, clutching her ruined dress. My mother was frozen against the wall, staring blankly at nothing. People always assume that revenge is a fiery, explosive thing. They think it feels like a massive celebration. But standing there, watching the man who terrorized me my entire life kneel in the wreckage of his own arrogance, I did not feel fiery. I just felt incredibly cold. I felt efficient. I turned to Montgomery and extended my hand. He immediately placed a sleek leather portfolio into my palm. I unzipped it and pulled out a fresh, crisp stack of legal documents. I walked over to the kitchen island, which had survived the table flip, and laid the papers out flat. I placed a black pen perfectly parallel to the pages. "Get up," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. My father slowly pushed himself off the floor. He looked 10 years older than he had when he woke up. He shuffled over to the kitchen island, his eyes glued to the documents. "I am not going to throw you out on the street," I said, my tone strictly business. "I am not going to destroy the company you built, and I am not going to send you to federal prison. Because unlike you, I do not enjoy watching people suffer just to stroke my own ego." My father let out a shaky breath, a glimmer of pathetic hope flashing in his eyes. He reached out to take my hand, perhaps thinking I was offering forgiveness. I stepped back quickly, disgusted by the gesture. "Do not mistake this for kindness," I warned him sharply. "This is a business transaction. The charity ends today. You are going to sign a standard, month-to-month residential lease agreement for this property. The rent will be set at the exact market rate for a luxury estate in this zip code. You will pay me $10,000 on the first of every single month. If you are one day late, the eviction process begins automatically." My mother gasped. "10,000? Marlo, we cannot afford that. The business is barely breaking even." "Then I suggest Sutton gets a job," I replied, staring at my mother with absolute contempt. "Because Sutton is moving out of the master suite today. She can take the small guest room over the garage. The master suite will remain locked and empty. If Sutton does not contribute to the rent, you can kick her out. That is your problem, not mine." I tapped the second document on the island. "This is an admission of guilt document regarding the forged loan application," I continued. "You will sign this, acknowledging exactly what you tried to do. Montgomery will keep this document, along with all the evidence of your fraud, in his secure vault. It will never see the light of day on one condition." I leaned over the counter, forcing my father to meet my eyes. "There are new rules for this family," I told him, my voice dangerously soft. "There will be no more insults. There will be no more condescending jokes at my expense. There will be no more treating me like a servant or an ATM. If either of you ever raises your voice at me again, if you ever try to humiliate me, or if you ever demand that I kneel before you, I will make one phone call. The lease will be terminated in 24 hours, and the fraud folder will be handed directly to the FBI." I picked up the pen and held it out to him. "You live by my rules now. Sign the paper, Dad." His hand shook violently as he reached out and took the pen from my fingers. He stared at the signature line for a long time. A tear actually escaped his eye, rolling down his cheek and splashing onto the contract. It was a tear of pure self-pity. He clicked the pen, leaned over the marble island, and signed his name. He signed away the illusion of his power forever. He pushed the papers toward my mother. "Sign it, Lenora," he choked out. My mother crept forward, keeping her distance from me, and hastily scribbled her name next to his. Montgomery stepped forward, quietly collecting the signed documents, verifying the signatures, and sliding them back into his secure briefcase. The legal binding was complete. I looked around the room one last time. It did not feel like a childhood home anymore. It felt like an investment property with highly problematic tenants. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out the brass key. The true owner's key. I held it up so the morning light caught the metal. I did not hide it in my palm anymore. I clipped it onto my main keyring, right next to the keys for my luxury car and my downtown corporate office. "Rent is due on the 1st, I said, turning my back on them. I walked out of the kitchen, down the grand hallway, and out the heavy front door. Montgomery and his associates followed me out, closing the door firmly behind us. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs. The sun was warm on my face. I walked down the long driveway, past the bluestone that bore my father's name, and got into my car. I did not look in the rearview mirror as I drove away. There was absolutely nothing left behind me worth looking at. It has been exactly 1 year since the grand family reunion. A lot can change in 12 months, when the truth is finally dragged out into the light. The Harrison family illusion completely collapsed, and the reality that took its place was harsh and unforgiving. Sutton never got her Lake Como wedding. Declan completely vanished from her life, blocking her number and moving to the West Coast. Without his fake wealth to prop her up, and without my father's stolen money to bail her out, her creditors finally closed in. She had to declare total bankruptcy. Last week, I drove past the local upscale grocery store in Lexington. Through the large glass windows, I saw Sutton. She was wearing a green polyester uniform apron, working the checkout register, scanning barcodes for minimum wage. She looked exhausted. The heavy makeup was gone. The influencer dreams were dead. She was finally living the life she actually earned. My parents are still living in the house, but it is not a home anymore. It is a prison they pay $10,000 a month to occupy. My father works 70 hours a week at his commercial supply company just to make the rent payments. Every month, on the first day of the month, exactly at 9 in the morning, a wire transfer hits my corporate account. He has not missed a single payment. I visit them occasionally, maybe once every few months, strictly to conduct a landlord inspection of the property. When I walk through the front door, the atmosphere is incredibly tense. They speak to me with excessive, unnatural politeness. They offer me coffee. They ask about my work. My father keeps his eyes glued to the floor when he speaks to me. The booming voice is gone. The arrogant patriarch is dead. He knows that the folder containing his federal fraud admission is sitting safely in Montgomery's vault, and the threat of a 10-year prison sentence hangs over his head every second of every day. I do not stay long during these visits. I check the plumbing, I make sure the roof is intact, and I leave. They are no longer my family. They are simply a line item on my financial spreadsheet. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my Boston office, looking out at the city's skyline, and I think about that terrible night. I think about the broken glass on the floor, the spilled red wine, and the horrific sound of my own relatives laughing at my humiliation. People often tell you that family is everything. They tell you that blood is thicker than water and that you must always forgive the people who share your last name. They tell you that keeping the peace is the highest virtue. But I learned the hard way that silence can be a dangerous trap. When you stay silent to protect toxic people, you are not keeping the peace. You are simply funding their war against you. You are giving them a safe, quiet space to sharpen their knives. Jia din doi kai la en hung kove no toi ti not. Hove muon long koan dung qua ban ba tra lai bang su kin myat. Suam ling qua tua trong sao nam kong phi la su hin not. Du la loi john twi dung de Thursday thap du ji to fap oy. Va kai koan kok den, twa kong kan phi het len. Twa chi kanda en hung to ji len tiang. Doi kai hin fat lon not cho en hung kakoi thwang ban kong phi la con john du. Ma la da ho tu ky veo ban on qua chin min bang soon go ngoc qua ho. There is a question that still lingers in the comment sections of my mind. A lot of my colleagues who know the real story have told me that I was far too generous. They tell me I should have triggered the eviction that morning. They say I should have thrown them out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They argue that letting them stay in the house, forcing them to work themselves to the bone just to pay me rent, is a cruel and unusual punishment. They say it is torturing them slowly instead of executing them quickly. I want to know what you think. According to you, was my final decision to make them my permanent, terrified tenants too merciful? Or was it the most ruthless, calculated revenge possible? Should I have kicked them out into the cold night, or is watching my father hand over his pride in the form of a rent check every month exactly what he deserves? Please, drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know how you would have handled the ultimate betrayal. I read every single one. Thank you so much for listening to my story today on Reddit Drama Family. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever been the invisible workhorse of a toxic family, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story of absolute, undeniable justice. Remember, know your worth, hold on to your receipts, and never, ever apologize for refusing to kneel.